And welcome all of you. We have 15 participants tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days to be at our last meet and greet forum. We kept a special group of elected officials to the end. It is our great Quincy delegation, and I'd like to introduce each of you to them now. John Keenan is our state senator. Then we have Tackey Chan, we have Bruce Ayers, and we have Ron Mariano, our great state representative delegation. John, I'd like you to proceed as the state senator, and then as on the state rep side, if we could begin in order of seniority, that would be Rep Mariano to Rep Ayers to Rep Chan. After they've each given a presentation of sorts, what's going on with the state of the state, any other pertinent information they'd like to let each of us know, the floor will then be open to the questions that have been submitted into this chat. So welcome, and it is your turn, State Senator.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Good evening, everybody. It is great to be here. And I guess the thing that is most pressing at the state level right now is what we are going to do relative to our financial situation. We obviously limped through the end of fiscal year 2020. Fortunately, to make things work financially as we closed out 2020, we did not have to do a draw on our rainy day account. We're now, I guess, 5 months into fiscal year 2021. And at this point, we still do not have a state budget. It was a series of interim budgets passed, and we're in the last of those budgets now, the one that will bring us through the end of October. And anticipating what's next, the Senate Ways and Means, House Ways and Means, and Secretary A&F had a hearing to kind of get a sense of where we stand in terms of revenue projections and the budget. The general sense was that we have some issues, clearly, from a financial standpoint. Our revenues are down. There is an estimate now that they will be down about $3.5 billion over what was expected when we started the budget process last January. And as a result of that meeting and trying to get a consensus on where we were, the governor introduced a $45.5 billion budget plan, even though there was an expected loss of about $3.5 billion, $3.6 billion in revenues. His budget relies on $1.8 billion in federal funding and a $1.35 billion draw from our rainy day account. So with those two items, and then with projected revenues going forward, the governor is confident that the budget will be balanced. The process now is that the House and then the Senate will introduce their versions of the budget, or historically that's how it's gone. We'll see exactly what takes place this year, but historically the House will do their budget, the Senate will do their budget, they'll reconcile the differences, and then send a budget to the governor. There's been some hope that that will be done over the next several weeks, although there is some work to be done. On the Senate side, we've met with our Senate Ways and Means chair, expressed our priorities, and the goal for me, and I think for many on the Senate side, is to get as close as we possibly can to having level funded budgets for many of our departments, our agencies, and for many of the groups that provide services to people throughout the Commonwealth. We made a commitment, the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, to essentially level fund a Chapter 70 school aid and also unrestricted general government aid to last year, with some adjustments for inflation and also for some changes in enrollment. And so we've promised the communities that, which means we're going to have to look at the rest of the budget really, really carefully. So that's where we're at from a financial standpoint. And in terms of other legislation, we have extended our formal session basically to the end of the calendar year into early January. The expectation was, I know on the Senate side, that we would address COVID-related matters, budgetary matters, and then matters that were in conference committee. And I think there's 5 items that are presently in conference committee, 5 bills. And so we'll wait to see the results of the conference committee. We'll continue to work on the budget, and then we'll address any situations that come up related to COVID, such as housing, food security, assistance to businesses, and also continued unemployment benefits for the residents of the Commonwealth. So that's kind of where we're at in a snapshot. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. And I look forward to answering any questions that people may have. But thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, John. And please keep in mind that we will have the availability for all of your questions to be asked to our delegation once they've all spoken with us. The next person on our agenda to speak to us this evening is Majority Leader Ron Mariano. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. It's good to be here, I think, as we try to puzzle through the status of our budget situation. And I thank John for that concise update on the finances of the Commonwealth, because he's right on. Those are the numbers that we are living with. To update a little bit on what John has said, that we are already begun our budget process. Our chairman of Ways and Means is meeting with members now to put our budget together. The goal of this whole thing is to have it on the governor's desk before Thanksgiving. And I think we'll be able to do that. I think that the fact that we're still in session and operating over Zoom and conference calls and everything else, that all the other new technologies has shown a willingness to cooperate and to move things forward as best that we can under these circumstances. And that's going to have to apply to the budget. It's the one thing that we have to do statutorily. We have to present a balanced budget, and we will do that. How that looks is open to debate and question, and we will go through a process that will have input from all the members as we go forward, and it'll be voted on, sent to the Senate. Hopefully the conference between the Senate and the House will be short. There isn't an awful lot of discretionary money to spend. So I don't see wide disagreement on how to spend our money. So I do think that we will be able to resolve this fairly quickly. And it's in everyone's best interest to do that. As far as the other matters that we're going to take up, we are in session to take up COVID-related matters in some of the conference committees. I, for one, chair the conference committee on healthcare, and we are making progress. It is my hope that we will have a conference committee report either just before the election or just after the election. But ongoing negotiations have been taking place in all 5 of the conference committees. So we're anxious to get those done in place. And that's pretty much the status of what's going on up here now. It is very difficult to negotiate a conference committee resolution when everything is distanced and you can't always get a hold of the people that you want to talk to, and your feedback isn't instantaneously. I'm used to doing these where you'd get in a room and hammer things out. This is a lot more difficult than the usual way we do things, but it is part of the new normal, and we will just have to adjust.
Thank you very much, Ron. Our next speaker is State Representative Bruce Ayers. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks, Alicia, and it's nice to be here tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to have a chance to give a little bit of an update, and just wanted to kind of follow up on some of the things that John and Ron talked about. You know, like their offices, my office too has received an awful lot of calls, budget related. Majority of the calls were geared towards the economy, COVID-19. In preparation to tonight, I looked at some of the call logs and emails and things that were bigger priorities for the district. And, you know, probably the majority of the calls and things we've been working on has been unemployment claims, trying to help residents, constituents navigate through the process to get on unemployment. We've heard from an awful lot of small businesses in the district, trying to see if they're eligible for some help financially from some loans. We've worked with Congressman Delahunt's office with that quite a bit too. And then even closer to home, I think Ron touched upon the state agencies. We want to make sure, obviously, that we're getting more than our fair share of state services, particularly during these tough times. And, a couple of those agencies I'd just like to touch on. Of course, over the summer, state police patrols, Wallaston Beach, Quincy Shore Drive, Firstbrook Parkway. My office got an awful lot of calls from constituents with some of your public safety aspects of it, littering, loitering, speeding. I want to make sure that the state police are working very closely with the Quincy police to ensure the safety of the residents down there. There were some issues with some off-street parking when they closed the parking lot there. And along the lines of state agencies, we go to the parks, the DCR. With our Parks Department, wanted to make sure that there weren't any jurisdictional issues with, say, the city. In my district alone, you have Squantum Point Park. I share Wallaston Beach, obviously, with Tackey, the hummocks, and a lot of issues come into play there. You want to make sure that we have adequate manpower. They have the right equipment, resources to keep the beach clean and safe, particularly during the summer months with the increased population. I want to make sure whoever's responsible jurisdictionally is doing their job and that they're working closely with city officials too on that. One item that just popped up, I just kind of want to touch upon that is related to DCR. The last couple of days got an awful lot of calls with that agency closing the Chickatopic Road. I don't know if some of the residents or folks have heard about it, but if you're in the West Quincy area, it's become a big concern, particularly if you're up in the area of Bunker Hill Lane or Salem Street and those areas. DCR made a decision Friday to close down Chickatopic Road Saturday. There's been a lot of problems up there with speeding, and unfortunately there was a fatality recently. So they worked with the state police and they came up with a decision to close down the road, obviously with the gates. So I'm hearing from the residents there, as you can imagine, it's creating an awful lot of traffic congestion. It's putting a lot of additional on-street parking for the residents, for some of the folks going up there trying to get to the hiking trails on the Blue Hills. So we're trying to work with them now. I know that some of the state folks have been talking to the city folks like Chris Cassani on traffic and parking, the police. We're trying to facilitate maybe another solution where potentially they can open that, but maybe on a 8-to-8 basis and see how that works out to crack down on some of the problems they've been having. So that's something that's new. Right now we're encouraging people to give us a call. You can call me, obviously, and we'll make sure your concerns addressed to the state officials. But right now it's closed. We're not sure when it's going to reopen. We're trying to come up with some solutions to take the pressure of the traffic and the on-street parking off some of the folks up in that area.
Yeah, I actually heard about that as well, Bruce, and they've given you no timeline. That's a pretty drastic move.
It is.
Yeah. Was that due to the fatality that they finally put the hammer down and closed it down last week?
I think it was. I've met with some of the residents up there over the last couple of months, trying, along with the state police, trying to crack down. There's an awful lot of speeding up in that area. Okay. And it's been problematic. We've worked with the state police and Quincy police in that area to try to put in some preventive measures, to hinder those efforts. But now there's negotiations going on with the state police and DCR. So we're trying to obviously come up with a remedy, but we don't want to put a lot of extra traffic on those side streets and parking on the residents that live in that area also. Maybe one of the solutions, and I'm not sure what that's going to be yet. I know there's going to be a lot of meetings coming up, but we want to make sure that there's public input. They didn't give any input to the residents or
Not at all.
really the officials to weigh in on that matter. And I think that would have been very helpful.
Yeah, it was extremely sudden. I had a friend who drove it on Friday and went back to drive it Saturday, and it was closed. Absolutely no forewarning that it was going to occur. Could be for very reasonable and understanding reasons, but no forewarning, because as we all know, that area is also a great cut through. All right.
Yeah.
It's not just seasonal or pleasure driving anymore through there. And a lot of people don't like to get out on 128, and they use Chickatawbit as a alternative to that. So the 8 to 8 thing might work well on a weekend. It's a killer for the commuters during the week that
Yeah,
want 128.
That's right, Alicia. You raise a good point because, they've closed it, during the COVID a few months back. And I know over the years they've tried different scenarios, but, there is data out there. I know that the police have, that DCR has, that, that we can use to try to see how we can improve some additional safety measures. I talked with Representative Bill Driscoll this afternoon for a while on this. Of course, he's on the other side in
Representative
Milton.
from Milton, right?
Right, and he's sharing the same concerns too. And as you alluded to, it's a major cut through for those two areas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your update, Bruce. Always informative. Our last state representative to address us this evening is State Representative Tackey Chan. Welcome, Tack.
Hey, good to be here. You guys see my hand moving around a lot the screen because I'm using my tablet. So there's always a bit of motion in front of me. Bruce, John, and Ron have already talked about a lot of this stuff that really is pending before the state. On my world, I chair consumer protection professional licensure, and I'm not responding well to a Zoom-based video world. I still prefer doing things in person. But that being as it is, I've been running weekly meetings, now bi-weekly with my neighbors to update on what's going on in the committee. My staff is doing research nationally and locally about the alcohol, the restaurants, the hospitality industries as a whole, about where things stand, and try to do some comparisons. And at the same time, we're still holding hearings. I'm one of those odd committees where I keep getting consumer bills and home petitions for liquor license quota adjustments all year long. So we've been migrated over to Zoom-based hearings, as well as putting the hearings on Facebook Live and providing recordings to the Legislative Information Services to put it online. So we're still trying to maintain some degree of normality through video conference hearings to ensure that the public gets to testify and see what's going on. If not live, at least you have recording to watch us. So pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been talking to basically all the hospitality industries about how things are going to play out. And I'm always doom and gloomy these days, but it is really not good. You guys seen the restaurants in the news, but I don't think they captured the gravity of how things are. Well, 3,400 restaurants out of 16,000 are closed. A good chunk of that may not come back. The restaurant associations has done surveys, the retail associations have done surveys, and the restaurant association tells me that 40% of all restaurants don't believe they're going to open again if they don't get some kind of federal assistance, especially in the payroll protection program and PPP, as well as if there's no change in how we behave out there in terms of wearing masks and social distancing properly, not spreading disease, it's going to have a really scary effect on them. So that's what we're looking at. You look about close to half the restaurants closing for a combination of not federal assistance, and COVID doesn't change around here, and the winter's coming. Cape Cod did okay. It had a good burst at the end as they get ready for the shutdown in the winter. The Berkshires did okay, but greater Boston area easily on hospitality has suffered the most. About 40% of the hotels in the state are closed. We're not sure how many are going to reopen at this stage. We estimate somewhere in the area of about 60,000 plus jobs in the state that are tied to the hotel industry is still unemployed. The whole industry themselves have a furlough/layoff rate of anywhere between 40 and 80%, depending on the type of hotel we're talking about. So, this is again the ripple effect economy. If one part shuts down, it has all these secondary effects of all these businesses that work it. So, like for example, a hotel has a function of a wedding. If they can't have a hotel, you can't have the wedding planners, the caterers, the dressmakers, the tailors, the photographer. It is just these economic ripple effects of one business venue that creates other things. And of course, we don't have the conventions coming in, sporting events that are pretty obvious, and the massive ripple effects. You guys heard the forest closed over by the garden in response to COVID. So we're watching that stuff. The alcohol industry is actually suffering as well. I know it sounds odd because everyone's like, oh, the package stores are doing great, but they're not all doing wonderfully. The ones in college towns, the ones in remote areas are extremely challenged right now. And I've been talking to the inspectors about what's going on. And with the increased cost of PPP, social distancing, limiting access to stores, it is getting rough. And companies like the beer distributors, the guys that deliver your beer, rely about 60% plus of their business is the restaurants. So they've had to dispose of tens of millions of dollars of beer during the pandemic. They had to collect it all back from the restaurants that closed, pay them back for the beer, then dispose of the beer safely. You can't just throw it into the sink. You actually have to neutralize it before proper disposal. And then they have to figure out if they can get a refund from the supplier that manufactured the beer. So they're hurting bad nationally, the guys who get you your beer. Wine and spirits aren't that bad off in terms of distribution because spirits last longer. However, with the Napa Valley fires, this is going to be the worst crop of grapes you're going to see in decades. About 50% of the grape crop is pretty much done because of smoke damage. So that means this particular fermentation of wine is going to be short. So I've been told that if you're like Cabernet, you better stock up now because you probably won't see some in a year and a half coming out of Napa. There's also impact of the trade war in these industries. So aluminum is very high price right now because of the tariffs, and there's a shortage of carbon dioxide, oddly enough. So as a result, the industry is trying not to raise prices, even though the increased price of aluminum and carbon dioxide caused by the trade wars that the government's involved in. So that's a pretty interesting piece of trivia. Hotels themselves are having mortgage problems at this stage. A lot of the bigger chains actually mortgage as a pool, we discovered. And this is outside state control. It's really a federal matter where you can build 5 hotels and pool them under the same mortgage with a bank. If they don't get some kind of assistance in terms of how to deal with that relief since they have no customers, there could be just some massive ripple effects on the U.S. hotel industry as they can't pay their mortgages. Overseas businesses with hotels have really focused in on the first recovery areas, which is mostly China at this point, and some of smaller Asian countries have been able to recover a little bit better. So they're focusing on energy on COVID compliance in those areas to try to make up some money for the large international businesses. I think there's a lot of people looking around and saying, hey, this isn't so bad in terms of certain industries, but the numbers bear out that's not the case. And one of the ways we do this is checking liquor license returns. For example, 10% of all liquor licenses have been returned to the city of Boston from restaurants. Holyoke is closing at 60% liquor license returns. So it gives you an idea how many restaurants are closing Holyoke. And talking to some inspectors, Amherst, downtown Amherst is now a ghost town. With the limited number of students at the universities out there, the college towns are pretty much probably have permanent closures if something doesn't change in form of vaccine or in a combination of general public trying to behave better regarding COVID spread. So, we've been keeping track of that stuff at my level of the committee. We're actually going to also have a DPL oversight hearing, Division Professional Legislature hearing next Thursday as a continuation of an oversight hearing I did last year regarding their inability to have their licensing system check sex offender registry program. So their licensing program was not actually syncing with the sex offender registry board about finding out sex offenders. And it was an error they had for 5 years till they discovered it. So we did a lot of research during the pandemic period, and we're going to do a part 2 of that hearing. They changed commissioners. Commissioner Leila D'Amelia is running it now, but we thought it was important to do another public oversight hearing to find out what has changed at the division in addressing this very serious issue. Beyond that, I think we're pretty much all the same boat. We're keeping track of our service agencies, constituent services, same as Bruce. I heard a lot of that. Same need continues to be a big issue. The census is over, ended on October 15th. I've been talking about that all summer long, and the impact of COVID on that as well. And I mean, that's kind of the synopsis of some things I've been dealing with.
Thank you, Tackey. That was really very informative and very interesting. Much appreciate the information. At this time, I understand that a Google Doc has been created with all of the questions. And I don't know, having not seen the questions, if they're as specific to a particular individual, or if it is, please step forward. If not, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to answer the question. So with that being said, can we go forward and provide our guests with a question?
Oh, hi, Alicia. I made the Google Doc so that you would be able to see the questions as they've come in. Oh, sorry, you were just muted.
Can you do that? Can you do that, please?
Oh, would you like what? Sorry, I didn't. You were muted when you were speaking previously.
Could you please ask the questions?
Oh, that's what I didn't hear. Okay, so
Thank
no
you.
problem. All right. Sorry for the cat ears. My speakers aren't working. So we have this first one, which was asked by Danielle Kemp. And it was asked, and it's specifically for Representative Mariano, and that she'd like to reply she has a follow-up to the quote that was in the Boston Globe. It says that I was running around campaigning when I could be doing healthcare stuff, said State Representative Ronald Mariano, the House's majority leader. Mariano, a Quincy Democrat, is facing challenge from Republican Stephen F. Tugas in November and is also one of 6 legislators reconciling differences on sweeping healthcare bills the House and Senate passed. I often tell everyone, if you don't get reelected, you can't be a help to anyone. This is the first thing you deal with, Mariano said, but this was not the plan. This is not what we wanted to do going into lame duck sections, making rescission for this. So it's a question is, what can we do for anything through the lame duck, like evictions or et cetera? So basically it's wanting some responses to that for further of your thoughts.
Well, that quote was in response to a very specific question about why we would be taking up things in the lame duck session. And it was to exemplify and maybe illuminate folks as to why we have these sessions that end July 31st. And we want all our business concluded by July 31st. It's so that folks who have competitive races can be out campaigning. Because of the extreme situation we're in now, we had a number of conference committees that couldn't get done, so we extended our session. It took a vote, a unanimous vote of the House and the Senate, to extend the session through the end of the year. Normally, we wouldn't be taking up any matters this time of year. So it's a unique situation, and I was trying to show the difference between what we would be doing on a regular year and what we have to do now, and how there is now competition for our time. And that was the initial response to the question. And I guess to further go through what everything you read, and I'm having difficulty reading the question, but I do think though that We will try and deal with some COVID-related issues, as the senator mentioned in his opening remarks, when they are directly related to things that are affecting our constituents around the COVID virus. So it's not going to be a typical session in that we're not going to take in everything. Most of the committees have heard their bills and made decisions about which bills are going to go forward and which aren't. So a bulk of that is already taken care of. And now we're just waiting to see what may arise. Obviously, we have to do the budget. Statutorily, it's the one thing we're obligated to do. So that is the first thing we will do.
So while that question was directed towards you, Representative Mariano, I'm wondering if any of the other elected officials would like to say anything about this question, in particularly about passing legislation and getting things through the slam dunk session.
Sure, this is John Keenan. I know that the question was focused somewhat as well. More specifically, the general question was what will we address over the next few months. But I know there was a specific aspect of it relative to the Housing Stability Act. I'm not sure where that bill will end up. There's a lot of discussion going on now. As you may be aware, the governor introduced a plan last week that would designate about $171 million towards addressing the housing issue, rather than extend the eviction and foreclosure moratorium beyond October 17th. The governor chose to use some federal funds to assist both tenants and landlords. And today there was a call with Secretary Sudders and Secretary Keneally to discuss these matters. And the administration's position is that they think there's sufficient funding to cover several months, that there won't be, and there's some disagreement on these positions that they're taking, that there won't be a mad rush to the courthouse for evictions, that people have to be cognizant that even though notice to terminate basically will go out, that doesn't necessarily mean an eviction, although a lot of tenants do view that as an eviction and sometimes just move out when they get it, which would be unfortunate in these circumstances. And additionally, there is the CDC moratorium that's in place to the end of December. That moratorium is not as broad or comprehensive as what the state moratorium was. To qualify under the CDC moratorium, you need to have basically filed for assistance of some sort in order to prevent an eviction. The overall goal is to ensure that as few tenants, hopefully none, are evicted, but to recognize as well that landlords have utility payments and property tax payments and mortgage payments that they have to make during the COVID situation, during the pandemic. So it's going to be over the next few weeks, I think, making sure that the governor's plan is implemented properly, that the application process is streamlined as much as possible, that the verification issues are streamlined. We're hearing from a lot of the housing advocates that that's been a problem, to make sure that going from the $4,000 cap in total amount of rent that can be paid up to $10,000, that there's proper accounting done for that, and that landlords who agree to take that level of funds understand that they are foregoing their right to evict for up to 6 months or more, depending on whether there's children in the household. So all of those things have to be ironed out. But as that's progressing, there are ongoing discussions about whether the moratorium will need to be extended nonetheless. And again, the goal is to find the balance of keeping people in their homes during the pandemic and making sure landlords can continue to pay their bills and meet their obligations. Where that happens, when that happens, remains to be seen. But there are a lot of people with a lot of eyes on this right now, wondering whether the governor plan is going to work and prepping something in the alternative should it not work.
So we do have a couple questions about later on about what some of the bills for that. And so I'm thinking this question is more particularly targeted for acting during the slam dunk, as called slam dunk session. Would anyone else like to speak on that, or should we go on to the next question? Okay, so this next question is from Mike Berry, our Ward 1 chair. And so this is for everyone. The question: with the governor of New Hampshire suing Massachusetts to stop us from collecting tax payments on those working from home, how would this potentially affect our budget?
Right now, it would have no effect on our budget because we don't collect it. The hope was that we could garner some additional revenues from the folks who cross over the border daily and earn their living in Massachusetts, but pay very little in taxes here in the Commonwealth. This has been something that's been debated for a long time. And finally, DOR decided to take action. And we think we're within our rights to collect money. We do it for a lot of different things. When baseball players come in here, they're subject to taxes. When actors come in and make a movie, they're subject to state taxes. So we think we're within our rights. And I was a little bit surprised that the governor of New Hampshire was going to sue, because we think we're in our rights to collect some amount of money for the income that they earn here in the Commonwealth.
Would anyone else like to speak on that?
Can I ask Ron a question about his answer? I understand that. I agree with you. You live in New Hampshire, but you work here in Massachusetts. And New Hampshire does it to Mass residents if they, live in Massachusetts and go New Hampshire to Maine. Everybody does. But this was because of the COVID pandemic and that they weren't crossing over and using our infrastructure. And I think that was his point. It was that they're working from home. They're not going to Massachusetts.
This issue is debated long before the COVID even existed.
That's why he's bringing it up now.
Well, that's what he thinks. He thinks he has. He thinks his ground is more solid because of COVID. But I don't think it changes much of anything.
Okay.
This has been a historical problem.
Got it. Thank you, Ron. Because that's how I took this whole suing, was due to COVID. And as you're pointing out, this has been an argument for a long time, and he's using this as an opportunity. Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else would like to speak to that from our delegation? Okay, Melissa, the next question. Thank you.
Okay, so this next question, we had a couple from Joe Horosi and Ida Del Vecchio. There was some kind of follow-up to it in the chat, but it was specifically the question was about when will we pass the Guaranteed Housing Stability Act? It's kind of more around there was a concern about over 100,000 houses in Massachusetts, especially in communities of color and immigrant communities, are at risk of eviction, and the state moratorium on eviction expiring on October 17th, 2020. And so there's a concern about about whether it's be able to prevent a pending eviction crisis. In particular, concerns about unjudged evictions and foreclosures due to COVID-related debt, and prevent rent hikes and no-fault evictions as we recover from COVID-19. And so this is kind of some of the follow-up for that. And yes, just to clarify, put your questions in the chat and I will add them to the Google form so that they are in the order that it is. So this follows up is basically asking about the plan for passage of the Guaranteed Housing Stability Act at this time.
I guess I can just add a little bit to what I had said earlier. There is a question about whether it's going to be enough. I spoke with Rob Corley, who is the CEO, I guess, down at NeighborWorks, who not only manages housing through his organization, but coordinates access to benefits for people. And his take on this is that in the short term, they have a commitment. They have their RAFT funds already committed, and RAFT is for families that are in transition. It's to keep them in their homes. That's committed. The additional money, as I said before, it allows landlords to collect up to $10,000 or be paid up to $10,000 on behalf of a tenant. And he's got some concerns about the paperwork involved in that. One of the things that he thinks will be beneficial and is still being worked on is giving landlords the ability to contact the state to start the process to access those funds. Sometimes you have tenants who, when they fall behind on rent, they don't want to talk with the landlord. They're fearful that if they do, it may result in eviction proceedings beginning. So this would give the landlord the ability, when a tenant is in arrears, to start the process, and the state would then reach out to the tenant and say, hey, this program is available. The landlord has contacted us, and then ask the tenant for verification as to it being a COVID-related matter in terms of them not being able to pay rent, and then also getting a documentation from the landlord, proof of ownership, and those types of things. So that's, they hope will allow these funds to reach people that they may otherwise not meet, might have access to. And then there's some discussion about providing notice, and I saw in the questions, to tenants to make sure that they're aware of their rights, that, and particularly that receiving a notice to quit is not an eviction, that it is just the first step, and that they should not immediately vacate the premises. The concern is that some of the tenants are not all that experienced in dealing with landlords because they've rented apartments for quite some time, and they've just signed leases and paid their rent, and they've never had any concerns about eviction. So they're not familiar with the eviction process. There's a concern if they get a notice to quit that they'll view that as an eviction. And rather than have something like that on their record, and how we address those records is another issue, but that they'll just move out. And again, that's, nobody wants to see that happen. And in terms of one of the other issues was, what's the plan for judges? They are bringing back retired judges and prepping them to handle what they anticipate will be a higher volume of cases than usual. And what I've conveyed to those that are looking at this issue in the Senate is that perhaps we should look at a hybrid if we get to the point of addressing this through legislation. And the hybrid would be that in those cases where evictions had been initiated prior to COVID, that we allow those to start going and working their way through the courts. They'll be viewed in the context of COVID, and that will be obviously a key factor in determining how those evictions proceed, but at least opening the doors to the courthouse, so to speak, allowing those processes to begin, getting mediators involved and resolving those. And that'll take some of the pressure off when this greater number of evictions is expected. And while that is occurring, perhaps extend the moratorium for a period of time, whether that ends up being 3 months into the next calendar year or 6 months, it's who knows, but kind of developing a hybrid, extend the eviction moratorium, allow some of the backlog to start making their way through the process, get them into mediation, and then allow the funding that's there through the governor's plan to start working as well.
Let me pipe in, picking off John here. John's already talked about the impact on landlords. Commercial and residential have a lot of costs associated to maintaining their business. Very small landlords in particular, who only have 1 or 2 units, they have to pay property taxes and so forth. However, Massachusetts is still the strongest pro-tenant laws in the United States, by far and none. I mean, you'd be surprised. We get constituent calls from landlords about how to evict. And that does happen. And it does, as John points out, there's a notice to quit. You have to do proper notice. And then you can't just get rid of you right away. It's pretty involved. And there's also the fight for deposits and, the last month's rent. And that's all factored in. So, it is very serious. But at the same time, though, the current laws in place doesn't mean you have to be evicted immediately. And there's a cost to landlords to evictions. One of the things I'm kind of discovering dealing with the various industries I'm dealing with is a degree of denial going on in the real estate market. In the college towns, there's no students renting residential areas, period. Moving in was very, very low this past September. And now, kids are going to have to go home if they're not well in COVID. And international students are a massive bulk of Boston universities. They're not here either. Many of them do not live on campus. And then you throw in the commercial properties, downtown Boston commercial properties still at pre-COVID level valuation, which is quite shocking given the fact, as you all know, we're telecommuting, we're not going to the town, and businesses have been closed. And restaurants have been asked to, or actually not asked, demanded by landlords to have to pay all their back rent when they were closed during the height of COVID, which of course they didn't have any money to pay because, they're closed. And this is not just them, but also retailers as well. So I think there's also a degree of denial in the real estate industry at a certain level regarding the length of the crisis we're in and the ability for people to pay services and restaurants and retailers and others so they can then pay their rent. I think there's going to be some coming to light of what the reality is as we, unfortunately, I still believe we're going into a second wave. I think we're here. But as we move into this next period into wintertime, I think some sobering is going to happen in the real estate industry.
And just to follow up that that Senator Keenan had referred to, a couple of the follow up to that I've now kind of added is about whether the governor plans to include money for judges to process the evictions, and concerned that the bill only covers for small homeowners and landlords, and as well as I believe Senator Keenan referred to this a little bit, but about what the state is doing to help inform people of their rights. He referred to the notice to quit and the difference, and so I think that question is a bit more about how to help people who are completely unfamiliar with the process, as Senator Keenan had said. So I just wanted to put that out there for any of the other of our delegation who might want to address these aspects of that question.
What you're describing is constituent services to us. I mean, Greater Boston Legal Services, Norfolk County has the free legal clinic. They've been kind of reactivating in a virtual level. We do a lot of referrals to those groups. Neighborhood Works, Quincy Community Action Programs have a landlord-tenant assistance programs. We've been here before. It's called the 2008 financial crisis. This is more severe in terms of landlord-tenant issues, but the infrastructure is in place already. And I've dealt with these constituent calls as well as Bruce, John, and Ron. We were always able to direct people to the right place if they need help. I would suspect they're going to be calling local government as well for these type of referrals. And because we have the internet, some way, somehow, people are able to figure out, what's going on. And now I see Dan Hacker's put up a Zoom expanding reach up here for some reason, but not sure what we want to talk about. You want to talk about Zoom getting to the cell phone business?
Sorry, we're accidentally, I didn't have that on. Dan, you're sharing your screen. Would you mind stopping share your screen? I'm trying to get that to work right now, but it's not showing me up. Sorry, I thought it was set up that only hosts can share screens, so that fixed. Okay, fixed. Sorry about that.
I'm good. I mean, unless you want to talk about voice over internet competition in the COVID world. I mean,
All right, let's go on to the next question, Melissa.
Yep. So the next question is from our member Dan Hacker, and it's if we'd like to speak on the cuts in services the MBTA is planning and its effect on people that must rely on the T for their transportation needs.
I'll jump in on that one. We've gotten some constituent inquiries about cuts in services on certain routes, the 214 and 216 down the Howes Neck in Germantown. The MBTA has basically eliminated the loop that on some of the scheduled rides. They've eliminated the loop that goes over to Stop and Shop. So that's presenting an issue for people that live in Germantown and Howes Neck, particularly O'Brien Towers, who take the bus to go to Stop and Shop. So work with the MBTA to make sure that on certain of those scheduled trips that there is access to Stop and Shop, so that people do not have to walk from the store road to the Coddington Street and get on the bus there. In Braintree, which I represent, there's an issue about the main route that basically goes all through Braintree and circles over to the South Shore Plaza. And in asking the MBTA about those routes, what we're learning is that they have done a pretty detailed analysis of utilization, what routes are being used most, and they are trying to maintain the best services possible on those routes. And for those routes that are not used as much, still trying to ensure that there's service, but the service will be more limited in terms of number of trips that are offered on the route. In the bigger picture, the MBTA is facing a significant revenue deficit. And so that's why they're looking at cutbacks in service. There's been some talk, do you raise fares now? Do you not raise fares? I think they've come to the position that you don't raise fares, you try to maintain service as best you can. General Manager Poptak has joined transportation officials from across the country in lobbying Washington as they work on another stimulus package to make sure that they include additional funding for mass transportation. There's a real concern not only in Boston and Massachusetts, but all across the country that has been somewhat on the back burner as they talk about stimulus packages. And the concern is that if there's not additional money, then a lot of the capital planning that we've done, the more immediate work will be impacted. The capital planning on the 5-year plan may see an impact because of the MBTA struggle to meet its debt payments as a result of the revenue loss. So there's an awful lot swirling around, but the goal is to provide as much service as possible to as many people as possible, but to prioritize routes based on utilization and on subway systems to reduce the headway. For instance, on the Red Line Maid, it was scheduled to go eventually over the next couple of years to about a 4-minute headway. They may move backwards and have a 10-minute headway. What that is the time between trains. And so in doing that, they've got to make sure that the platforms are not overcrowded and the trains don't get overcrowded. So they're trying to find that number that works in terms of frequency and yet still allowing for some distancing on the subways. And the other impact has been the construction of the assembly of the Red Line and Orange Line cars out in Springfield has been delayed, and the arrival of those cars will be pushed back by about a year. So that's going to impact the upgrade of the system as well. They have used the pandemic periods to, on the Red Line in particular, through our districts, get a lot of work done. They've been able to accelerate the work in Braintree at that station, not only track work, but repairs within the garage and the station itself. Quincy Adams Garage have accelerated those repairs. You can see that they're doing track work between Quincy Center and Quincy Adams more frequently now because of the reduction in service. So there's a lot of that work that has been going on, but it's really going to be difficult to continue funding the MBTA at its current levels. And hopefully the federal government will step up and not only help the MBTA, regional transit authorities as well throughout Massachusetts, and then transportation systems all across the country.
If I could add to that, this has been an ongoing problem, and the T has been spending money considerably. And the House took up a bill that raised close to $600 million for the T. And before the Senate could take it up, we had the COVID issues jump on us. And so I don't know if there is an appetite to raise money around the T. But there has to be an awareness by everyone that we're in the midst of a difficult situation where revenue's falling like a stone and everyone struggling to get by. And raising taxes right now may not be the best way to get out of this recession, or depression, as some may call it. Some economists say we're leaning towards a depression. But I do think that the senator brought up a point that I want to stress. Unless we get federal help, and significant federal help, we will not be able to maintain services going forward at the level to which we've all become accustomed. We're looking at a $3 billion deficit, probably this budget, maybe a little more, $3.5 billion. Lord knows what it'll be next year's budget. In next year's budget, we won't have $3.3 million in the rainy day fund. So it's going to be very difficult to keep the level of service that we've expected and grown used to. We're going to do our best, and it's going to take cooperation of everybody and an understanding that maybe a 2-minute wait turns into a 10-minute wait. But we're going to do the best we can to maintain services so that everyone gets to be able to do what they're used to be doing. And it's going to be a challenge. And we have to understand that, and we have to work together.
Can I just add one thing quickly? Because I just saw something in the chat about the millionaire's tax, and following up what Ron said about an appetite for a tax increase. One of the concerns is that if there is a turn to a tax increase in the short term to raise revenue, to help fund all the programs that we'd like to fund, that that may jeopardize the public's view of the millionaire's tax, where some real serious revenue will be generated, some estimates between $1 and $2 billion. And so while we may raise a few $100 million, which is a significant amount, doing something in terms of revenue, and then another few $100 million and another approach, that when the time comes to vote on the fair share amendment, the millionaire's tax, that the public will say, you've already hit us twice. We don't care whether that's just for millionaires or not. We're not interested. And again, that's the long-term consistent revenue of between $1 billion and $2 billion for the millionaire's tax. And so all that's being kind of factored in, and I agree with Ron that it just may not be the right time to do any sort of revenue increase. And we also have a flat tax here in Massachusetts. Everybody's taxed the same, and that's why we have to go to the ballot and go through a constitutional process and then to the ballot to even do the fair share amendment. If we had a progressive tax system, we could look and say, okay, those that have done well during the pandemic, those that have seen their income grow or have seen profits through capital gains or whatever the case may be, that they could pay more. But we don't have that ability presently under the Constitution. And so our hands are tied in that respect. And so any talk about revenue is going to have to be really thoughtful talk, and we'll see where we end up. And I agree with Ron that fiscal year 2022 looks like it's going to be more challenging than the current fiscal year, particularly if the federal government doesn't respond with an appropriate level stimulus package.
Would we like to go on to the next question? Okay, great. So this next question is from David Jacobs, and he would like to know what's going on with the MCAS. So teachers are teaching remotely and they're not able to reach students at the same level. Special education teachers are creating year-long portfolios, which take months to produce. It's one thing to cancel MCAS in March, but many special ed teachers are doing portfolio assessment, and then come March, they will have put hundreds of hours into the portfolio assessments that get canceled. And so he wants to know about the school administrators and teachers get official guidance on the canceling of MCAS. Is there anything we can do to help all the teachers out there doing MCAS out portfolios so that they are not spending so much time producing these portfolios? Oh, Ron, are you trying to unmute yourself? Let me.
Yeah. Look, as a former teacher, I am certainly sympathetic to what every teacher is going through during this pandemic. But you have to remember that the pandemic hits different communities in different ways. So it's been very difficult to come up with a statewide policy across the board concerning MCAS. MCAS was put in place specifically to monitor the progress of students. It was, as someone who didn't vote for the original Ed bill way back when, and I think it was 1998, because of things like the MCAS, I am concerned about continuing the MCAS through long distance learning. I don't think the learning is as productive as if you were in a classroom with your teacher, getting direct and instant feedback and establishing a bond with the instructor. So I am leery of going forward with the MCAS. I don't think there's an appetite to eliminate the MCAS, but I do think we have to look at this as a district by district issue. Some communities have handled this outbreak very, very well, and the return to schools has not led to an increase in cases or an abnormal increase in cases. Whereas in other lower income areas where they're more densely populated, we have huge increases. So we have to be mindful of this is a problem that isn't generic, it isn't universal across the Commonwealth. So we have to let the local communities have some input in how they want to deal with their students. And we want the parents at local communities who are sending these kids to these schools to have some impact. As far as the alternative, the assessments that go on in special ed, it is part of the teacher's teaching strategy to evaluate under these assessments. So I think they have to go on. Will they be used as the definitive assessment in March? Probably not, because there won't be a test in March. But the issue is, for me, is teachers still have to go through the process, especially special ed teachers. These portfolios establish a relationship with the student and the instructor as they work through the portfolio. So I think they're very valuable. And whether they're used as a tool in the MCAS purview, or whether the teacher just uses them to strengthen some of the weaknesses in the student's background, I don't think it really matters. I think the student's the beneficiary of going through the whole portfolio exercise, and that's what's important.
Okay, so a bit of a follow-up from Dan Hacker is that why wouldn't they, because of the district by district, allow a moratorium and still allow local district to decide if they want to conduct MCAS during this period?
Well, I think the simple explanation for that is no one wants to get rid of the MCAS. The MCAS was used as a tool to see how school systems were doing. And there has been no hue and cry to eliminate the MCAS. And I don't know, I think you have some groups of people who would like to eliminate it, and they're using the COVID to bolster their case and make their argument.
Do we have anyone else who would like to speak on MCAT and any other concerns on education during this time? Well, I think that is the last question that I have received through the chat in particular. So Alicia?
Thank you, Melissa. Good job. And I do want to ask the delegation, and I apologize because I didn't get to read the article, but I saw the headline, that there's some back and forth of blaming going on between the governor and the legislature. There was an article, I just saw the headline today. Can you fill me in on what's going on right now, that there's a back and forth with each side blaming the other on some issue? Do you know what I'm referring to? I apologize for the vagueness of the question, but
I'll try this. I'll
Yeah.
give this one a go. I think it's kind of magnifying a bit here about blaming. I don't think that's really the right way to put it.
that's how the paper put it. And I was
Yeah, well,
curious, and I hadn't had a chance, because then I was evacuated because of a gas leak. So I couldn't get to read the article. So
Well, I suppose it lets you remember the title if nothing else, right? So, during this entire pandemic, I think one of the bigger challenges of the legislature is the fact that we still have to have our constituents heard throughout this whole situation. As Bruce said earlier, the Department of Unemployment Assistance was our #1 call all summer long, without a doubt, because even implementation of the pandemic unemployment assistance was very confusing because the Fed guidelines didn't come down to 2 weeks after the first stimulus package came through. And unfortunately, it's not like they call the congressman, they call all of us here at this level because it's a state-run program, but it's a federally funded system with which they set the guidelines. And the communication between the governor's office and ourselves and the various agencies has been challenged. We're working remotely, the staffing issues, people working, try to work while immune compromised. We all have friends that know friends at work, try to work through this immune compromised, and getting set up early on during a COVID situation was very tough. At the same time, though, members of the legislature, including all of us here, want to be able to express our constituent concerns and our policy issues about how things are operating, whether or not things are happening quick enough or how they're responding. And of course, there's going to be disagreement among all of us of how things are working. And I think that's really not a blame issue. I think it's the difference of opinion about how to operate, and also to ensure that how we think should get done at the local level, because we're so close to the local issues, is heard by the governor so they can adjust their plan as everything's district by district, town by town, neighborhood by neighborhood. Nobody knows better those neighborhoods than the local electeds. And this is something that we reemphasize constantly to the administration, that we can be good at providing feedback, give you ideas what's really happening, and getting the word out. For example, immigrant populations is a big issue that was brought up. And the legislature, not just myself, but all my colleagues were advocating to ensure that things were multilingual languages. So it's not just English and Spanish, captured a larger array of people in the Commonwealth. And, they made those changes. It took some time, but, they made those changes as it went along. So there's a lot of this learning process. But it is, but I also agree that we should have some accountability. I mean, I held a informational hearing about the Department of Unemployment Insurance fraud. There were people stealing identities, taking unemployment benefits from people who did not know that was happening until they themselves applied for unemployment benefits, and discussed the dangers associated with data breaches, security concerns of people's personal information, how much you put on the internet, how they can find information on you so they can pretend to be you. And also it is an active police investigation. There's only so much information you can get. So, I mean, various committees, the Holy Social Home was today. Elder Affairs held a Soldier Home hearing today out there virtually. So we are doing things. I don't think we always get the credit in the media that we are, but the various chairs and members and leadership team in both branches, are doing our best to get feedback and do our own accountability by asking questions and making sure that we can get some answers of what's happening.
If I may, I totally agree with Tackey, but Alicia, I'll try and answer your question. What you were referring to is the governor complaining about the lack of movement on a state police reform bill. That was in our committee, and in one of our committees, our public safety committee, and he as you know, is going through some real serious issues with the state police regarding overtime showing up. You saw the Globe's piece on how many people how many state police officers have gotten in serious trouble, and it appears to be very lightly disciplined. And he sort of lashed out today to blame the legislature for not putting through a bill that he put through that he said would have resolved some of these issues. While we have many bills that reform the state police in our committee, some of them a lot stronger than the governor's, and the governor has never ever shown an interest in seeing any of them move forward. So what we have here is a little bit of, well, I'm in trouble now. Let's see who I can point my finger at. And there is a bill that he filed a while ago that hasn't moved. But there are many bills that do a lot more to reform the state police than his bills that he has not championed or even shown any interest in. And that's what the dispute was about.
That's what that was. Okay. All right. I was dying of curiosity about that, Ron. I hadn't got a chance to read exactly what it was all about. So yeah.
Skip it. It's a lot of blame game.
Exactly. All right. I do see that, and Melissa, and I don't want to keep everybody too long because what are we at 10 minutes of 8 and it's been 6:30, but this has been extremely informative. I can't thank you all enough for taking the time out of your busy schedules, but we do have a question from Nancy Delisle. Are there changes that have been made during the pandemic? Anything from telehealth for mental health to outdoor seating, etc., that you would like to see continued in the future? That's a wide open question. Yeah, go for it, Ron.
If I may, Tackey and I were on a committee that the speaker put together for recovery after this thing to explore different avenues that through the governor's executive orders have worked. And telehealth is probably the best example of something coming out of this that we will use going forward, especially when it comes to mental health. The success of telehealth dealing with mental health patients has been phenomenal. And right now, I'm in the process of negotiating with my Senate counterpart on a bill that would make telehealth a permanent tool in the medical handbook. We want to make sure that at least for mental health, you have access to it at parity. In other words, whatever you pay for a doctor's, whatever the insurance pays for a doctor's visit, they would pay for a televisit, especially around mental health. The other stuff will be negotiated, but we are going to make sure it stays as a tool that doctors will use and will begin to invest in equipment that makes it easier for all their patients to use. So that's probably the biggest thing. And if I talk about some of the employment stuff we talked about, and some other things that we hope will change the way we do business coming out of this pandemic. So we are, it's a good question. We are trying to make some hay out of this and say, well, let's learn some things about how we've been doing things and how we can improve in just about every facet of the way we govern.
Going forward. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Before we end this very informative session, I want to give anybody an opportunity. I don't see any further. Just letting you know. Okay. All right. I think we're we are at the end of the program, but I want to thank, we had up to close to 25 participants tonight, which I think is a really good number. There's an awful lot of things going on, as you well know, between local races and the national races that are taking some of our members away from this opportunity. So I really want to thank each of you, and I want to remind all of the participants out there, you have an incredible state delegation that is working on your behalf. I want you to go out and vote for each and every one of them. Write down the entire ticket from top to bottom. And thank you, Senator Keenan, Majority Leader Mariano, Representative Ayers, and Representative Chan for participating in tonight's format. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Guys,
Be
thank
well.
you
Good night
so
now.
much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
I know.